Beneath our feet, hidden in caves and ancient burial mounds around the world, lie relics that could completely challenge our understanding of human history. Imagine finding the remains of beings who defy all logic, giants, not as myth or legend, but as real creatures who walked the earth alongside our ancestors. For centuries, cultures across the globe have told stories of giants. The Bible speaks of Goliath and the Nephilim. Norse mythology describes the Jotuns, massive beings who battled the gods. Native American tribes across North America have legends of towering red-haired cannibals who terrorized their ancestors. Greek myths are filled with titans and cyclops. But here's what's fascinating. These stories aren't just isolated tales. They appear in cultures that had no contact with each other, separated by oceans and thousands of years. How do we explain this consistency? Why do human societies across the world, from the Americas to Europe to Asia, all have stories about giants? Traditional archaeology tells us that these are simply myths, exaggerated stories meant to explain natural phenomena or teach moral lessons. But what if there's more to it? What if these legends preserve actual memories of encounters with beings significantly larger than the average human? Tonight, we're diving deep into the most compelling archaeological mysteries that suggest a race of giants may have existed thousands of years ago. From the red-haired giants of Nevada to towering warriors buried with golden treasures, from massive prehistoric creatures to mysterious hill figures carved into the English countryside, we'll explore discoveries that have left experts scratching their heads and rewriting history books. So, buckle up as we journey across time and continents, exploring mysteries that have baffled archaeologists for centuries. If you're ready to question everything you thought you knew, hit that like button and subscribe, but only if it feels right. Because by the end of this investigation, you might just find yourself questioning everything you thought you knew about the past. Our journey begins in the desolate landscape of Nevada, where the dry desert air has preserved secrets for thousands of years. In 1911, miners working for the Lovelock Guano Company were extracting bat guano from a cave near Lovelock, Nevada, when they made a discovery that would challenge everything they thought they knew about the prehistoric inhabitants of North America. Lovelock Cave isn't much to look at from the outside, just a dark opening in a rocky hillside overlooking an ancient lakebed. But inside this unremarkable cave, the miners began uncovering artifacts that told a story unlike anything found elsewhere in North America. They found baskets woven with techniques unknown to any local tribe, weapons of unusual size and construction, and most disturbing of all, human remains that were far larger than any Native American remains previously discovered. The local Paiute tribe had always told stories about this cave. They called it the lair of the Sitechi, which translates roughly to Tule eaters, a reference to the red-haired giants who, according to Paiute oral history, had once terrorized their ancestors. These weren't friendly neighbors. The Paiute described the Siteka as cannibalistic giants with red hair and pale skin who stood between 8 and 10 feet tall. According to Paiute legend, their ancestors had been at war with these giants for generations. The conflict finally ended when the Paiute tribes united and drove the remaining Siteka into this very cave. They then built fires at the entrance and smoked them out. Those who emerged were killed with arrows. Those who remained inside suffocated or burned to death. The miners initially dismissed these stories as typical Native American folklore, but as they continued their work, they began finding evidence that seemed to support the Paiute accounts. They discovered red-haired mummified remains of individuals who measured between 7 and 10 feet in height. They found sandals that were 15 inches long, far larger than any normal human foot. Most remarkably, they discovered a handprint pressed into the cave wall that measured a full 18 inches from palm to fingertip. But here's where the mystery deepens. The Nevada State Historical Society and the University of California became involved in excavating the cave in the early 1920s. Their findings were carefully documented and included dozens of artifacts that seemed to support the existence of an unusually tall people who had lived in the area thousands of years ago. Dr. Llewellyn Loud, who led the university's excavation, wrote detailed reports describing the discovery of human remains of enormous size. He noted that the skulls were significantly larger than those of typical Native Americans and showed distinct differences in bone structure. The teeth were also notably larger, and the overall skeletal frame suggested people of extraordinary height and build. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence was a mummified red-haired giant that measured over 8 feet tall. The preservation was remarkable. The dry cave environment had maintained not just the bones, but soft tissue and hair. The red hair was particularly striking because no Native American tribes in the region had red hair as a genetic trait. But then something strange happened. Many of the most significant remains and artifacts began to disappear from museums and collections. Some were reportedly destroyed in fires, others were simply misplaced or lost. The most impressive specimens, the ones that would have provided definitive proof of the giant's existence, vanished without a trace. Today, skeptics argued that the Lovelock cave giants never existed. They suggest that the remains were either normal-sized humans whose measurements were exaggerated, or that they were misidentified remains of other species. They point out that no peer-reviewed scientific papers have definitively established the existence of giants at the site. But supporters of the giant theory ask compelling questions. Why would the Paiute have such detailed and consistent stories about red-haired giants if they had never encountered them? Why were the original archaeological reports so specific about measurements and characteristics? And most puzzling of all, what happened to all the physical evidence? The mystery of Lovelock Cave raises uncomfortable questions about what we're willing to accept as historical truth. Were the cetacea real? Did a race of red-haired giants once inhabit the American Southwest? Or are we simply seeing what we want to see in fragmentary archaeological evidence? What makes this story even more intriguing is that it's not isolated. Similar accounts of unusually tall, red-haired people appear in Native American traditions across the continent. The Choctaw spoke of the Nahulo, pale giants who lived in what is now Tennessee. The Lakota had legends of red-haired giants in Minnesota. The Seminoles of Florida told stories of tall, pale warriors who had preceded them in the region. But if these giants existed, where did they come from? Some researchers suggest they might have been survivors from a lost civilization, perhaps refugees who fled some catastrophe in their original homeland. Others propose they could have been an isolated branch of early human migration that developed different physical characteristics over thousands of years. The truth about Lovelock Cave may be lost forever, buried with the missing evidence and the passing of the last witnesses. But the questions it raises continue to haunt archaeology. What else might be hidden in remote caves and forgotten burial sites across the Americas? And if giants did once walk among our ancestors, what other assumptions about human history might need to be reconsidered? The red-haired giants of Nevada represent just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Because while the Lovelock Cave evidence may be controversial and partially lost, other discoveries around the world paint a similar picture of unusually large humans who lived in the distant past. But the mystery of giants doesn't end in the American Southwest. Thousands of miles away, in the mountains of Eastern Europe, archaeologists have uncovered burial sites that tell their own story of people who stood head and shoulders above their contemporaries. These discoveries come with something the Lovelock Cave lacks: intact artifacts, careful documentation, and scientific analysis that confirms what ancient legends have long suggested. High in the Sakar mountains of southeastern Bulgaria, where ancient trade routes once connected Europe to Asia, archaeologists made a discovery in 2015 that would add another compelling piece to the giant puzzle. The burial mound looked unremarkable from the outside, just another of the thousands of such mounds that dot the Bulgarian landscape, remnants of Thracian civilization that flourished in this region over 2 millennia ago. But when the team led by archaeologist Daniela Agri began excavating, they quickly realized they had found something extraordinary. The burial chamber contained not just any ancient warrior, but someone who had clearly been a person of immense importance and, more significantly for our investigation, considerable physical stature. The skeleton itself measured nearly 7 feet in height, making this individual significantly taller than the average person of his time period. In the ancient world, when malnutrition and disease kept most people quite small by modern standards, someone approaching 7 feet would have been genuinely giant-like in appearance. But it wasn't just his height that set this warrior apart. The burial goods accompanying the remains were spectacular. A golden wreath adorned the skull, crafted with such skill that it still gleamed after more than 2,000 years in the earth. The warrior wore golden jewelry, including rings, bracelets, and decorative elements that spoke of wealth and status beyond ordinary nobility. Most impressive of all was a ceremonial knife with a handle encrusted with precious gems and gold inlay work. The preservation was remarkable. The dry mountain soil had maintained not just the metal artifacts, but details of the burial itself. The warrior had been laid to rest in a wooden chamber, surrounded by pottery, weapons, and personal items that painted a picture of someone who commanded respect and fear in equal measure. Dating analysis placed the burial at approximately 2100 years ago, during the height of Thracian civilization. The Thracians were known throughout the ancient world as fierce warriors and skilled craftsmen. Greek and Roman historians wrote about their prowess in battle and their unusual customs, but they also wrote about something else: the exceptional size of some Thracian warriors. Ancient sources describe Thracian kings and war leaders who towered over their contemporaries. The historian Herodotus wrote about Thracian rulers who were men of great stature and strength. Roman accounts mention Thracian gladiators who were prized specifically for their unusual height and build. These weren't myths or legends. They were contemporary observations recorded by people who had actually seen these individuals. The Sakar warrior's burial goods tell us he wasn't just tall, but important enough to merit an incredibly expensive funeral. The gold alone would have represented a fortune in the ancient world. The craftsmanship of the artifacts suggests access to the finest artisans and materials available. This was someone who commanded resources and respect across a wide area. But here's where this discovery becomes particularly intriguing for our investigation. The burial shows evidence of ritual practices that were unusual even for the Thracians. The positioning of the body, the specific arrangement of grave goods, and the construction of the burial chamber itself all suggest this wasn't just any important person. This was someone who was seen as different, perhaps supernatural. Analysis of the skeleton revealed more mysteries. The bone structure showed evidence of a diet rich in protein and nutrients, suggesting this individual had access to food resources that allowed him to reach his full genetic potential for height. But the bones also showed wear patterns consistent with a lifetime of intensive physical training and combat. This wasn't just a tall person. This was a tall warrior who had seen extensive battle. The skull structure was particularly interesting. While clearly human, it showed characteristics that were somewhat different from typical skulls of the region and time period. The jaw was more robust, the brow ridge more pronounced, and the overall cranial capacity was larger than average. Some researchers have suggested these characteristics might indicate genetic differences that could account for the unusual height. Recent DNA analysis has yielded intriguing results. The genetic markers suggest this individual belonged to a population group that was distinct from the typical Thracian gene pool. The closest matches come from populations that lived much farther north and west, suggesting this person or his ancestors may have migrated from quite distant regions. This raises fascinating questions about ancient population movements and genetic diversity in prehistoric Europe. Were there groups of unusually tall people who migrated across the continent, leaving traces of their passage in burial sites like this one? Could the giant legends of various European cultures preserve memories of encounters with such groups? The discovery of the Sakar warrior also connects to other similar finds across the Balkans and Eastern Europe. Bulgaria alone has yielded several other burials of individuals who were exceptionally tall for their time period. Romania has produced similar discoveries, as have Hungary and Poland. The pattern suggests that unusually tall individuals weren't just random genetic anomalies, but may have represented a distinct population group. What makes these European discoveries particularly compelling is their documentation and preservation. Unlike the controversial Lovelock cave remains, these skeletons are still available for study. Their measurements can be verified, and their archaeological context is well established. They provide concrete evidence that people of unusual height did exist in the ancient world. The craftsmanship of the burial goods also raises questions about lost technologies and knowledge. The goldwork and gem-setting techniques displayed in the Sakar warriors' artifacts were advanced beyond what we might expect from a supposedly primitive Bronze Age culture. This suggests levels of skill and knowledge that challenge our assumptions about ancient capabilities. As we examine the Sakar warriors' remains and burial goods, we're forced to confront the possibility that the boundary between myth and history may not be as clear as we typically assume. The consistent appearance of giant legends across cultures might not represent shared psychological archetypes, but actual memories of encounters with beings who are genuinely extraordinary by human standards. Yet questions remain. If giants like the Sakar warrior once existed across Europe, what happened to them? Why don't we find more examples from later time periods? Were they gradually absorbed into larger populations, or did they represent a distinct group that eventually disappeared entirely? The mystery deepens with each new discovery, leaving us to wonder what other secrets lie buried in the ancient burial mounds scattered across the European countryside. The Sakar warrior shows us that unusually tall individuals weren't limited to the legends of Native Americans or the myths of ancient Europe. But as compelling as the European evidence is, it represents just one piece of a global puzzle. Because across the ocean, in the mountains and valleys of the Americas, other discoveries have emerged that push the boundaries of what we think we know about ancient human populations even further. The story we're about to explore takes us to Mexico, where a discovery made in the late 1940s challenged not just our understanding of human height, but our entire timeline of human presence in the Americas. What archaeologists found near an ancient lake bed would spark debates that continue to this day and add another crucial piece to our investigation of ancient giants. In 1947, near the shores of what was once Lake Texcoco in the Valley of Mexico, archaeologist Helmut de Terra made a discovery that would reshape our understanding of early human presence in the Americas. The site, known as Tepexpan, was already famous among archaeologists as one of the most important early human sites in North America. But what de Terra and his team uncovered went beyond their wildest expectations. The discovery began when workers noticed unusual bones protruding from sediment layers that were clearly very ancient. When the archaeological team began careful excavation, they realized they had found the nearly complete skeleton of an early human. But this wasn't just any prehistoric individual. The remains were those of a man who would have stood nearly 6.5 feet tall, making him a giant by the standards of any ancient population. The geological context was crucial to understanding the significance of this find. The skeleton was embedded in sediment layers that dated back thousands of years, to a time when Lake Texcoco was much larger and supported megafauna like mammoths, giant ground sloths, and saber-toothed cats. This man had lived in a world that was fundamentally different from anything humans experience today. Initial analysis suggested the remains were over 10,000 years old, which would make Tepexpan Man one of the oldest human remains found in the Americas. But later, more sophisticated dating techniques placed him somewhat more recently, around 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. Even at this more conservative age, he represents one of the most significant early human finds in Mexico. What made Tepexpan Man remarkable wasn't just his height, though that was certainly striking. The skeleton showed evidence of a life lived in a harsh environment that demanded tremendous physical strength and endurance. The bone structure revealed someone who had engaged in intensive physical activity throughout his life, hunting large game, traveling vast distances, and surviving in conditions that would challenge even modern humans with all our technology. The skull was particularly intriguing. It was robust and large, with a cranial capacity that exceeded the average for both ancient and modern populations in the region. The facial structure was also distinctive, more pronounced than typical for early American populations, with features that suggested possible genetic differences from other Native American groups. Analysis of the bones revealed evidence of healed fractures, indicating this individual had survived serious injuries during his lifetime. The pattern of injuries was consistent with someone who hunted large, dangerous animals, the kind of megafauna that roamed the Americas during the late Pleistocene and early Holocene periods. This wasn't just a tall person, this was a tall hunter who had successfully survived in one of the most challenging environments in human history. The preservation of the skeleton was extraordinary. The alkaline lake sediments had maintained not just the bones, but traces of soft tissue and hair. This preservation allowed researchers to conduct analyses that would have been impossible with less complete remains. What they found raised even more questions about early human populations in the Americas. DNA analysis, conducted decades after the initial discovery, when such techniques became available, revealed genetic markers that were somewhat different from typical Native American populations. While clearly related to other indigenous American groups, Tepexpan Man carried genetic signatures that suggested his ancestry might have included populations that were distinct from the primary waves of migration across the Bering Land Bridge. This genetic evidence connects to one of the most controversial aspects of early American archaeology, the possibility that multiple distinct groups of people arrived in the Americas at different times, possibly by different routes. Some researchers have suggested that unusually tall individuals like Tepexpan Man might represent descendants of a migration that was separate from the ancestors of most Native American tribes. The tools and artifacts found near the skeleton were also unusual. Stone points and cutting implements showed sophisticated knapping techniques that were advanced for their time period. The size of some tools suggested they were designed for use by someone with large hands and considerable strength. Most intriguingly, some of the stone materials came from sources hundreds of miles away, indicating extensive travel or trade networks. The implications of Tepexpan Man's existence extend far beyond simple questions of height. If he represents a distinct population group that lived in the Americas thousands of years ago, what happened to his people? Why don't we find more remains of similarly tall individuals from this time period? Were they a small, isolated group that eventually died out or merged with other populations? Some researchers have suggested that Tepexpan Man and others like him might represent survivors of the megafauna extinction that marked the end of the Pleistocene epoch. As the giant animals they hunted disappeared due to climate change, these specialized big game hunters might have found themselves unable to adapt to the new environment. Their great size, which had been an advantage when hunting mammoths and giant ground sloths, might have become a liability when resources became scarce. But other evidence suggests a different story. Native American oral traditions from across Mexico and the American Southwest contain references to tall ancestors who lived in the distant past. These stories describe people who were skilled hunters and warriors, but who were eventually overcome by smaller but more numerous groups. Could these traditions preserve actual memories of encounters with people like Tepexpan Man? The controversy surrounding Tepexpan Man reflects broader debates in American archaeology about the diversity of early human populations. For decades, the field was dominated by theories that suggested a relatively uniform migration of people across the Bering Land Bridge around 12,000 years ago. But discoveries like Tepexpan Man, along with other controversial finds, have forced archaeologists to consider more complex scenarios involving multiple migrations and greater diversity among early American populations. Recent discoveries at other sites in Mexico and South America have yielded additional examples of unusually tall early humans. Brazil has produced skeletal remains of individuals who would have stood well over 6 feet tall. Chile has yielded similar discoveries. The pattern suggests that tall individuals weren't just rare anomalies, but may have represented a distinct population group that was present across much of the Americas. The study of Tepexpan Man also raises questions about the relationship between early humans and megafauna. His bones show clear evidence of a diet that included large amounts of meat from big game animals. The wear patterns on his teeth and the muscle attachment points on his bones suggest someone who regularly processed and consumed meat from animals like mammoths, giant bison, and ground sloths. This raises intriguing possibilities about human megafauna interactions. Were tall humans like Tepexpan Man particularly well suited to hunting the giant animals of the Pleistocene? Did their size give them advantages in bringing down prey that weighed several tons? And if so, what happened when those giant animals disappeared? The mystery of Tepexpan Man continues to evolve as new analytical techniques become available. Recent advances in ancient DNA analysis have revealed additional details about his genetic makeup, while new dating methods continue to refine our understanding of when he lived. But many questions remain unanswered. What we can say with certainty is that Tepexpan Man represents evidence that early human populations in the Americas were more diverse than previously believed. His unusual height, distinctive skull characteristics, and genetic markers all suggest that the story of human migration to the Americas is more complex than simple models would suggest. As we continue our journey around the world in search of giant mysteries, Tepexpan Man serves as a crucial piece of evidence that tall humans weren't just mythical figures or isolated anomalies. They were real people who lived, hunted, and died in the ancient world, leaving behind traces of their existence for us to discover and puzzle over thousands of years later. 3 continents, 3 giant mysteries, and we're not even halfway done. Make sure you're subscribed because our next stop takes us to China, where a 300,000-year-old discovery will leave you questioning everything about human evolution. From the ancient lake shores of Mexico, our investigation takes us halfway around the world to a discovery that pushes the boundaries of human height even further into the past. While Tepexpan Man lived relatively recently in archaeological terms, the evidence we're about to examine comes from a time when our species was still evolving, still developing the characteristics that would define modern humanity. What Chinese researchers discovered in a limestone quarry would challenge not just our understanding of ancient human height, but our assumptions about early human development across Asia. The story we're about to explore takes us back hundreds of thousands of years, to a time when the world was populated by human ancestors whose physical capabilities might have far exceeded our own. In the rolling hills of Liaoning province, northeastern China, a limestone quarry operation in 1984 uncovered something that would revolutionize our understanding of early human development in Asia. Workers blasting rock from the quarry face exposed a cave that had been sealed for hundreds of thousands of years. Inside, preserved by the unique chemical conditions of the limestone environment, they found the partial skeleton of an early human that challenged everything scientists thought they knew about our ancestors. The Jinniushan Human, as the discovery came to be known, lived approximately 300,000 years ago during the Middle Pleistocene period. This was a time when modern humans hadn't yet evolved, when our ancestors were still developing the physical and cognitive characteristics that would eventually define our species. Yet despite her antiquity, this individual displayed features that were remarkably advanced and, most relevant to our investigation, indicated a stature that was exceptional even by modern standards. The skeleton was that of a woman, determined to be in her 30s at the time of death based on analysis of bone development and tooth wear. But this wasn't just any early human female. Reconstruction of her skeletal dimensions indicated she would have stood approximately 168 centimeters tall, about 5 feet 6 inches. This might not sound extraordinary by modern standards, but in the context of her time period, she was genuinely gigantic. To understand just how unusual her height was, we need to consider the typical stature of early humans during the Middle Pleistocene. Most specimens from this period, both male and female, rarely exceeded 5 feet in height. Males of her species typically stood around 5 feet 2 inches, while females were usually considerably shorter. The Jinniushan woman was taller than most males of her time, making her a genuine giant by the standards of early human populations. The preservation of the skeleton was remarkable. The limestone environment had created conditions similar to natural mummification, maintaining not just the bones, but traces of soft tissue that allowed researchers to make detailed reconstructions of her physical appearance and capabilities. What they discovered painted a picture of someone who was not just tall, but powerfully built and adapted for a lifestyle that demanded tremendous physical strength. The skull was particularly significant. It was large even relative to her body size, indicating a brain capacity that was at the upper end of the range for early humans of her period. The cranial features showed a mix of primitive and advanced characteristics. She retained some of the robust features of earlier human ancestors, but also displayed traits that wouldn't become common until much later in human evolution. Analysis of the limb bones revealed extraordinary muscle attachment points, indicating arm and leg muscles that would have been massive by modern standards. Her femur, the thigh bone, was not only long, but incredibly robust, with ridges and projections that spoke of quadriceps and hamstring muscles capable of generating tremendous power. Her arm bones showed similar adaptations for extreme strength. The implications of these findings extend far beyond simple questions of height. The Jinniushan woman represents evidence that early human populations in Asia included individuals with physical capabilities that far exceeded anything we see in modern humans. Her combination of height, strength, and brain size suggests evolutionary pressures that favored individuals who could survive in extremely challenging environments. The geological context of the discovery provided crucial insights into the world she inhabited. The surrounding rock layers contained fossils of the animals she would have encountered: giant pandas, massive rhinoceros species, enormous bears, and other megafauna that dominated Asia during the Middle Pleistocene. This was a world where survival required the ability to compete with and possibly hunt animals that were much larger than anything early humans typically encountered. Stone tools found in association with the skeleton were also remarkable. They showed sophisticated knapping techniques and were larger than typical tools from this period, clearly designed for use by someone with large hands and considerable strength. Some of the tools showed wear patterns consistent with processing meat from very large animals, suggesting this woman and others like her were capable of taking down prey that would challenge even modern hunters with firearms. Genetic analysis of the remains, conducted using cutting-edge ancient DNA techniques, revealed surprising results. While clearly an early human, the Jinniushan woman carried genetic markers that were distinct from typical Asian populations of her time period. Some of the genetic signatures were more similar to populations that lived much further west, suggesting possible migration patterns or population mixing that conventional theories hadn't predicted. This genetic evidence connects to broader questions about human evolution in Asia. For decades, scientists assumed that early human development followed relatively predictable patterns, with gradual increases in height and brain size over time. But discoveries like the Jinniushan woman suggest the process was much more complex, with some populations developing advanced characteristics much earlier than expected. The discovery also raises questions about the relationship between early humans and the environment. The Jinniushan woman lived during a period of significant climate variation, when ice ages alternated with warmer periods and the landscape of Asia was constantly changing. Her unusual size might have been an adaptation to these challenging conditions, allowing her and others like her to survive environmental changes that eliminated smaller, less robust populations. Recent comparative analysis has revealed that the Jinniushan woman wasn't unique. Other sites in China have yielded remains of early humans who were similarly large and robust. The Dali skull, found in Shanxi province, belonged to an individual who would have been exceptionally tall. The Marba skull from Guangdong province shows similar characteristics. The pattern suggests that large, robust early humans weren't just rare anomalies, but may have represented a distinct population group across ancient Asia. These discoveries have implications for understanding later Asian populations as well. Some researchers have suggested that the unusual height and strength of certain historical Asian populations, such as the Mongol warriors who conquered much of the known world, or the legendary strength of certain Chinese martial arts masters, might reflect genetic inheritance from ancient populations like the one represented by the Jinniushan woman. The preservation conditions that maintain the Jinniushan skeleton also allowed for analysis of her diet and lifestyle. Isotope analysis of the bones revealed a diet rich in meat from large animals, consistent with someone who was either a successful hunter of megafauna or lived in a group that specialized in taking down very large prey. The wear patterns on her teeth showed evidence of processing tough materials, possibly including meat, hides, and plant fibers. But perhaps most intriguingly, the skeleton showed evidence of care by others. Several bones had healed fractures, indicating injuries that would have been debilitating for weeks or months. The fact that she survived these injuries suggests she lived in a social group that cared for injured members, evidence of cooperation and social organization that was advanced for this early period. The mystery of the Jinniushan woman deepens when we consider what happened to her population. Despite their apparent advantages in size, strength, and possibly intelligence, these robust early humans seem to have disappeared from the fossil record. Later human populations in Asia were typically much smaller and less robust, suggesting that the evolutionary pressures that favored large size during the Middle Pleistocene changed dramatically. Some researchers have proposed that climate change eliminated the megafauna that these giant early humans specialized in hunting. As the large animals disappeared, the advantages of great size and strength became liabilities, and smaller, more adaptable populations prevailed. Others suggest that the rise of more advanced tool technologies made raw physical power less important for survival. But there's another possibility that connects to our broader investigation of giants. What if some populations descended from these ancient giants survived longer than the fossil record suggests? Could some of the giant legends from Asian cultures preserve memories of encounters with descendants of people like the Jinniushan woman? Chinese folklore is filled with stories of ancient giants who possessed superhuman strength and lived in harmony with the natural world. The legends of the Yellow Emperor describe warriors of extraordinary size and power. Taoist texts speak of ancient masters who were taller and stronger than ordinary humans. While these are usually interpreted as myth, they might preserve actual memories of encounters with populations that retained some characteristics of the ancient giants. The study of the Jinniushan woman continues to yield new insights as analytical techniques improve. Recent advances in protein analysis and isotope studies have revealed additional details about her diet, health, and lifestyle. New methods for extracting ancient DNA continue to refine our understanding of her genetic relationships to both earlier and later human populations. What remains clear is that the Jinniushan woman represents evidence that our understanding of early human evolution is far from complete. Her exceptional height, massive build, and advanced characteristics challenge simple linear models of human development. She suggests that our ancestors were more diverse, more complex, and potentially more capable than we typically assume. As we continue our global investigation of giant mysteries, the Jinniushan woman stands as perhaps the most ancient evidence that humans of extraordinary size once walked the earth. Her existence 300,000 years ago proves that the potential for giant size has deep roots in our evolutionary history, raising questions about what other surprises might be waiting to be discovered in the fossil record. Ancient Chinese giants from 300,000 years ago? That's incredible. But wait until you see what was found buried in an English oak tree. Subscribe right now because this next discovery has been hiding in plain sight for centuries. From the ancient caves of China, we return to more recent times and familiar landscapes, but the mysteries we encounter are no less compelling. While the Jinniushan woman shows us that giant humans existed hundreds of thousands of years ago, our next discovery proves that unusually large individuals continue to appear throughout history, even in the relatively recent past. The story we're about to explore takes us to the windswept moors of northern England, where a discovery made nearly 2 centuries ago revealed burial practices so unusual and remain so remarkable that they continue to puzzle archaeologists today. What workers found in a stone cist would challenge everything they thought they knew about ancient British burial customs and add another crucial piece to our investigation of historical giants. On a summer day in 1834, workers quarrying stone on the Yorkshire moors near the village of Gristhorpe made a discovery that would become one of the most remarkable archaeological finds in British history. As they broke apart what appeared to be a natural stone formation, they realized they had uncovered something far more significant: an ancient burial that had been perfectly preserved for thousands of years. The burial was unlike anything previously discovered in Britain. Instead of the typical stone-lined grave or simple earth burial common to the region, this individual had been laid to rest inside a massive oak tree trunk that had been hollowed out to create a coffin. The tree itself must have been enormous. Estimates suggest it was over 1,000 years old when it was cut down to create this unique burial chamber. But it wasn't just the unusual burial method that made this discovery remarkable. When the workers carefully exposed the remains, they found the skeleton of a man who would have stood well over 6 feet tall, making him a giant by the standards of Bronze Age Britain. The preservation was extraordinary. The acidic conditions inside the oak coffin had maintained not just the bones, but soft tissue, hair, and even fabric from his burial garments. Carbon dating eventually established that Gristhorpe Man, as he came to be known, lived approximately 4,000 years ago during the early Bronze Age. This was a time when the average height of British males was around 5 feet 6 inches, making this individual nearly a foot taller than his contemporaries. His height alone would have made him a figure of awe and possibly fear among ancient British populations. The skeleton revealed a man who had lived to be approximately 60 years old, an exceptional age for the Bronze Age when life expectancy rarely exceeded 35 years. His longevity might have contributed to his status, as elder individuals who survived to such an advanced age would have been repositories of wisdom and experience in prehistoric societies. But his age also allowed researchers to study the effects of a lifetime of activities on his skeletal structure. Analysis of the bones revealed fascinating details about his life and status. The muscle attachment points showed evidence of a lifetime of intensive physical activity, but not the kind associated with manual labor. Instead, the wear pattern suggested someone who had engaged in activities requiring coordination, balance, and refined motor skills, possibly warfare, ceremonial activities, or craft specialization. Most remarkably, the man showed evidence of having survived a traumatic brain injury. A depression in the skull indicated he had suffered a severe blow to the head at some point in his life, but the bone showed clear signs of healing, indicating he had lived for years after the injury. This survival would have been remarkable in any ancient context, but particularly so for someone of his time period, when medical knowledge was limited and brain injuries were typically fatal. The burial goods found with Gristhorpe Man were extraordinary and provided crucial insights into his status and the society he lived in. He was accompanied by a bronze dagger with an elaborate hilt, indicating his importance as a warrior or leader. The craftsmanship of the weapon was exceptional, with decorative elements that showed connections to metalworking traditions across Bronze Age Europe. But perhaps most intriguingly, he wore a cape woven from the hair of cattle, sheep, and possibly other animals. This garment was unlike anything else found in Bronze Age Britain, suggesting either foreign origins or access to materials and crafting techniques that were exceptional for the time period. The cape alone would have required the hair from dozens of animals and hundreds of hours of skilled weaving. Analysis of the weaving technique revealed something remarkable. The methods used were more advanced than typical Bronze Age textiles. The pattern and construction showed influences from continental European traditions, suggesting either that Gristhorpe Man had traveled extensively or that he belonged to a group with wide-ranging cultural connections. The oak coffin itself was a marvel of Bronze Age engineering. Creating such a burial chamber would have required enormous effort and resources. The tree had to be carefully selected, felled, and then hollowed out using only bronze tools. The precision of the work was remarkable. The interior was smooth and perfectly fitted to the body, while the exterior retained the natural bark that helped preserve the contents. But here's where the mystery deepens. Oak coffin burials were virtually unknown in Bronze Age Britain. Similar burial practices have been found in Scandinavia and northern Germany, but they were rare even there. Why was this particular individual buried in such an unusual manner? What did it signify about his status or origins? Some researchers have suggested that the oak coffin burial indicates Gristhorpe Man was a foreign ruler or important visitor who died while traveling through the region. The unusual burial method might have been an attempt to honor his customs rather than local traditions. This theory is supported by isotope analysis of his teeth, which suggests he may have spent his early years in a different geographical region. Others propose that he represented a local leader who had achieved such high status that normal burial customs were considered inadequate. The massive effort required to create his tomb would have demonstrated the power and resources of his followers, serving as both a memorial to his importance and a display of wealth to neighboring groups. The preservation of soft tissue allowed for detailed analysis of his physical condition and health. Researchers found evidence that he had enjoyed a rich diet throughout his life, including regular access to meat, which was a luxury in Bronze Age societies. His teeth showed minimal wear despite his advanced age, suggesting he had access to high-quality food that didn't require extensive chewing. The study of his DNA, conducted as techniques became available, yielded surprising results. While clearly belonging to the population groups that inhabited Bronze Age Britain, he carried genetic markers that were somewhat unusual for the region. Some of his genetic signatures were more common in populations from Scandinavia and northern Germany, supporting theories about possible foreign origins. Recent advances in isotope analysis have revealed additional details about his life and travels. The chemical signatures in his bones suggest he may have lived in several different regions during his lifetime, possibly indicating a life of travel or migration. The isotope ratios from his teeth, which form in childhood, are different from those in his adult bones, confirming that he had moved significant distances during his life. But questions remain about what happened to people like Gristhorpe Man. If unusually tall individuals like him existed in Bronze Age Britain, why don't we find more examples? Were they rare genetic anomalies, or do they represent a population group that became extinct or was absorbed into larger populations over time? The mystery becomes even more intriguing when we consider that the giant turtle of Vanuatu lived at almost the same time as Gristhorpe Man, yet on the opposite side of the world. Could there be a connection between these massive creatures and the appearance of giant humans across different continents? The answer might lie in the giant creatures that dominated the ancient world, beasts so enormous that they make our modern elephants look small by comparison. While we've been exploring the mysteries of unusually tall humans throughout history, there's another aspect of the giant puzzle that we cannot ignore. Because our ancestors didn't live in a world populated only by other humans. They shared their environment with creatures that were genuinely gigantic, animals so massive that they make modern elephants look small by comparison. Understanding these ancient giants of the animal kingdom is crucial to our investigation because it helps us comprehend the world that large humans would have inhabited. If giant creatures once roamed the earth in abundance, then the existence of giant humans becomes not just possible, but perhaps inevitable. The story we're about to explore takes us to the heart of America, where recent discoveries have revealed that our continent was once home to ground-dwelling sloths that stood as tall as modern giraffes. In 2019, construction crews preparing to build a new highway bypass around Lubbock, Texas, made a discovery that transported them back to an ancient world that few people can truly comprehend. As bulldozers scraped away layers of sediment that had accumulated over thousands of years, they began exposing fossilized bones of enormous size. What they had found were the remains of giant ground sloths, creatures so massive that they challenge our understanding of what land animals can achieve. These weren't the small, slow-moving tree sloths that most people picture when they hear the word sloth. The giant ground sloths of prehistoric America were colossal beasts that could stand up to 12 feet tall on their hind legs and weigh as much as 8,000 pounds. To put this in perspective, they were larger than modern elephants, yet they were plant eaters that used their massive claws not for hunting, but for stripping leaves from the highest branches of trees. The Lubbock discovery yielded dozens of individual specimens, representing what appears to have been a thriving population of these creatures that lived in the area between 12,000 and 10,000 years ago. The preservation was extraordinary. The dry Texas climate had maintained not just the bones, but traces of hide, hair, and even stomach contents that revealed what these giants ate during their final meals. Analysis of the remains revealed creatures that were perfectly adapted for a world that no longer exists. Their massive claws, some over a foot long, were designed for digging and stripping vegetation rather than for defense. Their powerful hindquarters allowed them to rear up on their back legs to reach branches that were 15 to 20 feet off the ground. Their skulls were equipped with grinding teeth that could process enormous quantities of tough plant material. But here's what makes this discovery particularly relevant to our investigation of human giants. The giant ground sloths didn't live in isolation. The same geological layers that contained their remains also yielded evidence of human presence: stone tools, fire hearths, and even what appear to be butchering sites where these massive animals had been processed for meat and materials. This evidence suggests that early humans in America didn't just coexist with these giant creatures, they actively hunted them. The logistics of taking down an animal that weighed 4 tons would have required cooperation, sophisticated planning, and quite possibly humans who were themselves unusually large and strong. Normal-sized humans armed with stone-tipped spears would have faced enormous challenges in bringing down such massive prey. The timing of the giant ground sloth extinction is particularly intriguing. These creatures had survived for millions of years, thriving through multiple ice ages and dramatic climate changes. Yet they disappeared approximately 10,000 years ago, right around the time that human populations in the Americas were expanding and developing more sophisticated hunting technologies. Some researchers argue that climate change killed off the giant ground sloths by eliminating the specific plant communities they depended on. As the last ice age ended and forests changed, these massive herbivores couldn't adapt quickly enough to survive. But others point to evidence that humans played a direct role in their extinction through intensive hunting pressure. The debate becomes more interesting when we consider the folklore and oral traditions of Native American tribes. Many groups across North and South America have legends about giant, hairy creatures that their ancestors once hunted or encountered. The Lakota spoke of massive beasts that could be taken down only by the greatest warriors. Amazonian tribes have traditions about giant sloths that lived in the forest until recent times. Most remarkably, some of these oral traditions include specific details about the anatomy and behavior of giant ground sloths that match what paleontologists have learned from fossil evidence. How could these details have been preserved in oral traditions for thousands of years unless the stories were based on actual encounters? The discovery of giant ground sloth remains also connects to reports of similar creatures surviving much later than the supposed extinction date. In South America, there have been persistent reports of large, sloth-like creatures in remote areas of the Amazon and Patagonia. While mainstream science dismisses these as misidentifications or folklore, some researchers suggest they might represent relict populations that survived longer than currently believed. Cave paintings and petroglyphs throughout the Americas depict large, hairy creatures that bear striking resemblances to giant ground sloths. Some of these artistic representations are found in areas where no fossil evidence of the creatures has been discovered, suggesting either that the animals had wider distributions than currently known, or that the artwork preserves memories of encounters from much earlier times. The relationship between giant ground sloths and early humans becomes even more intriguing when we examine the tools and weapons found at sites where both species are present. Many of the stone points and cutting implements are unusually large and robust, designed for penetrating thick hides and processing massive amounts of meat. These tools suggest that the humans who made them were probably quite large and strong themselves. Recent analysis of cut marks on giant ground sloth bones has revealed sophisticated butchering techniques that require detailed knowledge of the animal's anatomy. The placement of cuts shows that hunters knew exactly where to slice, to efficiently separate meat from bone, and how to access the most valuable parts of such enormous carcasses. This level of expertise suggests sustained interaction between humans and these creatures over extended periods. But the giant ground sloths weren't the only massive creatures that early humans encountered. The same archaeological sites that yield sloth remains also contain bones from giant beavers the size of modern bears, massive armadillos that were larger than cars, and ground birds that stood over 10 feet tall. This was a world populated by giants across multiple species. The existence of so many giant animals raises fascinating questions about the ecological conditions that supported such massive creatures. The plant communities must have been incredibly productive to sustain herbivores weighing several tons. The overall biomass of the landscape would have been enormous, creating an environment where large predators and large humans could have thrived alongside giant prey animals. Some researchers have suggested that the hunting of giant ground sloths and other megafauna helped drive human evolution toward larger body sizes. The advantages of being tall and strong would have been enormous when facing creatures that could kill a human with a single swipe of their claws. Over generations, populations that regularly hunted megafauna might have selected for individuals who were large enough to be effective hunters. This theory connects to the evidence we've already examined of unusually tall humans like Tepexpan Man, who lived during the period when giant ground sloths and other megafauna were still common. Could the giants of human legend be survivors from a time when being large was necessary for survival in a world populated by massive animals? The disappearance of the giant ground sloths marks one of the most dramatic ecological transitions in American history. Within a relatively short period, the continent went from supporting dozens of species of massive animals to having virtually no large land animals except for bison and elk. This transition fundamentally changed the environment that humans inhabited and may have eliminated the selective pressures that favored large human body size. Modern attempts to understand giant ground sloth behavior have yielded fascinating insights into how these creatures lived and interacted with their environment. Analysis of coprolites, fossilized dung, has revealed that they consumed over 200 different plant species, indicating they were highly adaptable feeders despite their massive size. The chemistry of their remains suggests they had efficient digestive systems that could extract maximum nutrition from relatively poor quality plant material. The social behavior of giant ground sloths remains largely mysterious, but some evidence suggests they may have lived in family groups and shown care for their young, similar to modern elephants. Trackways preserved in ancient lake beds show multiple individuals traveling together, while some fossil sites contain remains of adults and juveniles in close association. As our investigation of giants continues, the giant ground sloths serve as a reminder that our planet once supported life forms that were genuinely gigantic. Their existence proves that the biological and ecological conditions for supporting massive land animals were present in the relatively recent past. If such creatures could exist, then the possibility of giant humans becomes not just conceivable, but almost expected in such an environment. The mystery of what happened to these gentle giants continues to haunt paleontology and archaeology. Their disappearance marked the end of an era when the Earth was populated by creatures that would seem mythical if we didn't have their fossilized remains as proof. But their legacy lives on in the oral traditions of indigenous peoples and in the questions they raise about the world our ancestors inhabited. Giant creatures, giant humans, the pattern is undeniable. But if you think giant ground sloths were impressive, subscribe immediately, because what Austrian workers found in a wine cellar will show you just how massive the creatures our ancestors faced really were. The giant ground sloths of America represent just one example of the massive creatures that once shared our world with early humans. But these giants weren't limited to the Americas. Across the globe, from the frozen tundra of Siberia to the wine cellars of Europe, evidence continues to emerge of creatures so enormous that they challenge our understanding of what life on Earth was once like. The discovery we're about to explore takes us to an unexpected location. Not a remote cave or ancient burial ground, but a modern wine cellar in Austria, where recent construction work uncovered evidence of creatures that dwarfed even the giant ground sloths. What workers found beneath the foundations of a building would provide new insights into the world of Ice Age giants and raise questions about how our ancestors could have possibly survived alongside such massive beasts. In the spring of 2024, workers renovating a wine cellar in the picturesque Austrian town of Gobelsburg made a discovery that would make international headlines and add another piece to our understanding of the giant world our ancestors inhabited. What began as a routine renovation project quickly became one of the most significant mammoth discoveries in European history when the construction crew's excavation uncovered an enormous cache of fossilized bones. The discovery site was unremarkable from the outside, just another centuries-old wine cellar in a town known for its historic architecture and excellent vintages. But as workers dug deeper to expand the cellar's storage capacity, they began encountering massive bones embedded in the clay soil beneath the building's foundations. What they had stumbled upon was nothing less than a mammoth graveyard that had been sealed beneath the earth for over 30,000 years. The scale of the discovery was breathtaking. By the time archaeologists and paleontologists completed their excavation, they had recovered hundreds of individual bones representing multiple mammoths of various ages. The preservation was extraordinary. The alkaline clay soil had maintained not just the bones, but traces of organic material that allowed researchers to conduct detailed analysis of these ancient giants. The specimens included complete tusks measuring over 10 feet in length, leg bones that were thicker than telephone poles, and skulls so massive that they required mechanical equipment to safely remove them from the excavation site. But what made this discovery particularly remarkable wasn't just the size of individual bones, but the evidence it provided about mammoth behavior and social structure. Analysis revealed that the site contained remains from at least 3 different mammoth species that had lived in the area over a period of several thousand years. The oldest remains dated to approximately 40,000 years ago, while the youngest were around 30,000 years old. This timeline placed them squarely within the period when early humans were known to have inhabited Central Europe. The largest specimens were woolly mammoths that would have stood nearly 12 feet tall at the shoulder and weighed up to 8 tons, roughly twice the size of modern African elephants. But the site also contained remains of even more massive creatures, steppe mammoths and southern mammoths that could reach heights of 14 feet and weights approaching 12 tons. These were among the largest land animals that ever existed. What made the Austrian discovery particularly significant for our investigation was the clear evidence of human interaction with these massive creatures. Stone tools were found scattered among the mammoth bones, along with clear-cut marks on several specimens that indicated systematic butchering by human hands. Most remarkably, some of the larger bones showed evidence of having been used as tools or building materials by early humans. The logistics of processing such enormous animals would have been staggering. A single mammoth would have provided several tons of meat, enough to feed a large group for weeks or months. But harvesting this bounty would have required coordinated effort by multiple individuals and sophisticated techniques for preserving and storing the meat in a time before refrigeration. The cut marks on the bones revealed fascinating details about mammoth hunting and processing techniques. The patterns showed that early humans had detailed knowledge of mammoth anatomy, knowing exactly where to cut to access the choicest meat and how to efficiently separate useful materials like ivory, hide, and sinew from the massive carcasses. But here's where the discovery becomes particularly relevant to our investigation of giants. The tools found at the site were unusually large and robust, clearly designed for use by people with significant strength and large hands. Some of the stone points were massive enough to penetrate thick mammoth hide, while the cutting implements were sized for processing bones that were several feet long and weighed hundreds of pounds. Analysis of the tool manufacturing techniques revealed sophisticated knapping skills that produced implements specifically adapted for mammoth hunting. The stone points were designed with specific angles and thickness ratios that would allow them to penetrate deep into massive animals without breaking. The hafting techniques showed advanced understanding of leverage and force distribution. Recent DNA analysis of the mammoth remains has yielded surprising insights into the genetic diversity of these ancient populations. The specimens showed much greater genetic variation than expected, suggesting that mammoth populations were more complex and interconnected than previously believed. Some of the genetic markers were previously unknown, indicating that European mammoth populations included lineages that haven't been found elsewhere. The discovery also provided evidence about mammoth social behavior that parallels what we know about modern elephants. The age distribution of the remains suggested that mammoths lived in family groups led by older females, with young males leaving the herd when they reached maturity. Some of the specimens showed evidence of care for injured or elderly individuals, indicating sophisticated social structures. But perhaps most intriguingly, the site contained evidence of what appears to have been ritualized treatment of mammoth remains by early humans. Some bones were arranged in patterns that couldn't have occurred naturally, while others showed signs of having been deliberately modified or decorated. This suggests that mammoths held significance for early humans beyond their value as sources of food and materials. Cave paintings throughout Europe depict mammoths in ways that suggest they were viewed as more than just prey animals. Many artistic representations show mammoths in ceremonial or spiritual contexts, often associated with human figures who appear to be shamans or ritual specialists. The Austrian discovery provides physical evidence that such relationships actually existed. The environmental context revealed by the Gobelsberg site paints a picture of Ice Age Europe that was radically different from today's landscape. Pollen analysis and other environmental indicators show that the region supported vast grasslands that could sustain huge herds of mammoth and other megafauna. The biomass of large animals would have been enormous by modern standards. This productive environment would have created ideal conditions for supporting both giant animals and potentially giant humans. The abundance of large prey would have provided selective pressure, favoring humans who were big and strong enough to successfully hunt such massive creatures. Over generations, populations that specialized in mammoth hunting might have evolved toward larger average body sizes. The timing of mammoth extinction in Europe coincides closely with the appearance of more sophisticated human technologies and possibly larger human populations. While climate change certainly played a role in their disappearance, the evidence from sites like Gobelsberg suggests that human hunting pressure may have been the decisive factor in driving these giants to extinction. Some researchers have suggested that the relationship between humans and mammoths was more complex than simple predator-prey dynamics. The artistic evidence and ritual treatment of mammoth remains suggest that these creatures held deep cultural significance for Ice Age peoples. Their extinction may have represented not just the loss of a food source, but the end of a worldview that included living alongside genuine giants. Modern attempts to understand mammoth behavior and ecology have benefited enormously from discoveries like the Austrian cache. The preserved organic material has allowed researchers to analyze mammoth diet, health, and even stress levels during their final years. What emerges is a picture of creatures that were highly intelligent, socially complex, and remarkably well adapted to Ice Age conditions. The discovery has also revealed details about mammoth reproduction and development that weren't previously known. Analysis of juvenile specimens showed that young mammoths grew at extraordinary rates, gaining hundreds of pounds per year during their first few years of life. This rapid growth would have been necessary to reach adult size in the harsh conditions of Ice Age Europe. Recent advances in ancient DNA technology have even raised the possibility of de-extinction projects that could bring mammoths back to life. While such efforts remain highly controversial and technically challenging, they highlight how well-preserved mammoth genetic material can be. The Austrian specimens have contributed genetic sequences to these research efforts. The Gobelsberg mammoth cache continues to yield new discoveries as analysis techniques improve. Recent protein analysis has revealed information about mammoth physiology that couldn't be obtained from bones alone, while new dating methods continue to refine our understanding of when these creatures lived and died. What the Austrian discovery ultimately demonstrates is that our Ice Age ancestors inhabited a world populated by genuine giants. The successful coexistence and interaction with creatures weighing 8 to 12 tons would have required human capabilities that were extraordinary by modern standards. The evidence suggests that our ancestors rose to meet this challenge, developing technologies, social structures, and quite possibly physical characteristics that allowed them to thrive alongside the giants of the Ice Age world. As we continue our investigation, the mammoth bones of Austria serve as powerful evidence that the biological and ecological conditions for supporting truly massive creatures existed in the recent past. If such giants could flourish, then the possibility of giant humans becomes not just conceivable, but perhaps inevitable in such an environment. We've traveled the globe, uncovering giants that lived alongside humans until very recently. But our final mystery brings us full circle to a giant that's been staring at us for centuries. Subscribe now, because the Cerne Abbas giant might hold the key to this entire puzzle. From the fossilized remains of giant creatures that once roamed our planet, we turn to our final mystery. One that brings us back to where we started our journey, with questions about giant humans. But this time, instead of examining bones and burial sites, we're looking at something that has stood in plain sight for centuries, carved into the English countryside where anyone can see it. The monument we're about to explore represents perhaps the most enigmatic piece of evidence in our entire investigation. It's not hidden in remote caves or buried beneath ancient sediments. Instead, it dominates a hillside in southern England, visible for miles around, yet its meaning and origins remain as mysterious today as they were when it was first recorded centuries ago. This giant figure, carved into the landscape, may hold the key to understanding how our ancestors remembered and honored the giants who once walked among them. Rising from the rolling hills of Dorset in southern England, carved into the chalk downs above the village of Cerne Abbas, stands one of the most mysterious and provocative monuments in all of archaeology. The Cerne Abbas giant, a massive figure cut into the hillside, has dominated the landscape for centuries, yet despite extensive study and speculation, its origins and meaning remain shrouded in mystery. The figure itself is imposing by any measure, 180 feet tall and 167 feet wide, making it one of the largest hill figures in Britain. But it's not just the size that makes this monument remarkable. The giant is depicted as a nude male figure wielding a massive club, his anatomical features rendered in explicit detail that would have shocked Victorian sensibilities and continues to raise eyebrows today. The creation of such a monument would have required enormous effort and careful planning. The figure is carved by removing the topsoil to expose the white chalk beneath, creating lines that are visible from miles away. Maintaining the image requires regular cleaning and recutting, as grass and weeds constantly threaten to obscure the ancient outline. Yet someone has been performing this maintenance for centuries, preserving the giant for future generations to puzzle over. But here's where the mystery deepens. Nobody knows for certain when the Cerne Abbas giant was created. The earliest definitive written reference to the figure dates to 1694, when church wardens' accounts record money spent on maintaining the giant. This suggests the figure was already ancient and well established by the late 17th century. But how much older might it be? Some historians argue that the giant dates to the medieval period, created as a piece of anti-clerical satire targeting the nearby Cerne Abbey. According to this theory, the figure represents either a pagan deity or a crude caricature designed to mock the celibate monks who lived in the valley below. The prominent display of male anatomy would have been particularly offensive to religious sensibilities, but other evidence suggests the giant is far more ancient. Archaeological investigations have revealed that the figure's outline follows natural contours of the hillside that would have been more pronounced thousands of years ago. This suggests the monument might have been designed to work with landscape features that have since been modified by erosion and human activity. Recent analysis of sediment layers beneath the figure has yielded tantalizing clues about its age. Radiocarbon dating of organic material found in the giant's outline suggests construction sometime between 700 and 1100 CE, but these dates come with significant uncertainties. Other studies have suggested the figure could be much older, possibly dating to the Roman period or even earlier. The giant's pose and attributes connect it to ancient traditions of giant figures and heroic deities that stretch back to prehistoric times. The club-wielding pose is reminiscent of depictions of Hercules found throughout the Roman world, and some researchers have suggested the Cerne Abbas giant might represent a Romano-British version of this classical hero. The anatomical emphasis might reflect fertility symbolism that was common in ancient religious practices. But there's another possibility that's particularly relevant to our investigation. The giant might preserve actual memories of encounters with people of unusual size. British folklore is filled with stories of giants who once roamed the countryside, and the Cerne Abbas figure might represent a memorial to one such individual. The specific location chosen for the monument, on a prominent hillside visible throughout the valley, suggests it commemorates someone or something of great importance to the local population. Local traditions have long associated the giant with fertility and supernatural power. For centuries, women hoping to conceive would climb the hillside to visit the figure, believing that contact with the monument would help them become pregnant. These customs suggest that the giant was seen as more than just a curiosity. It was viewed as a source of genuine power that could influence human affairs. The club wielded by the giant is particularly intriguing from an archaeological perspective. The weapon is depicted in detail, showing characteristics that match actual Bronze Age and Iron Age clubs found in British archaeological sites. This attention to accurate detail suggests the creator had knowledge of ancient weapon types, either through direct cultural transmission or from examining actual artifacts. Recent archaeological surveys of the area around the giant have revealed additional mysteries. Ground-penetrating radar and other non-invasive techniques have identified what appear to be additional carved features that are no longer visible on the surface. These might represent parts of the original design that have been lost to erosion or deliberate modification over the centuries. One of the most intriguing discoveries was evidence of what might have been a second figure adjacent to the giant. Soil analysis and magnetic surveys have revealed disturbances in the ground that could represent another carved figure, possibly a companion to the existing giant. If confirmed, this would suggest that the Cerne Abbas monument was originally much more complex than what we see today. The positioning of the giant on the landscape also reveals careful planning and astronomical knowledge. The figure is oriented so that certain celestial events, such as the rising of specific stars or the position of the sun during solstices, align with parts of the monument. This astronomical orientation suggests the giant served ceremonial or religious functions that require precise positioning. Analysis of medieval and earlier maps of the region has revealed additional clues about the giant's history. Some ancient field names and boundary descriptions reference landmarks that seem to relate to the figure, suggesting it was well established and important enough to serve as a reference point for legal documents centuries ago. The maintenance history of the giant provides fascinating insights into how different generations have interpreted and preserved the monument. Victorian-era accounts describe extensive restoration work that may have altered the original design. Some features that we see today might reflect 19th century ideas about what the figure should look like rather than its authentic ancient appearance. Recent DNA analysis of soil samples from the giant's outline has yielded surprising results. The soil contains genetic material from plants that are not native to the region, suggesting that materials from distant areas were brought to the site during construction or maintenance. This implies that the monument's creation involved resources and planning that extended well beyond the local area. The oral traditions associated with the giant connect it to stories about ancient battles and heroic deeds that supposedly took place in the surrounding landscape. According to local legend, the figure represents a giant warrior who was killed while raiding local villages. His body was supposedly outlined where it fell, creating the hill figure that we see today. But there's another version of the legend that's particularly intriguing for our investigation. Some stories suggest that the giant represents not a fallen enemy, but a protective deity or ancestor who watched over the local population. According to these traditions, the figure was created to honor someone who had defended the area from threats and whose memory deserved to be preserved for future generations. The connection between the Cerne Abbas giant and other hill figures across Britain raises questions about whether these monuments represent a coordinated tradition of commemorating important individuals or events. The Uffington White Horse in Oxfordshire, the Long Man of Wilmington in Sussex, and other chalk figures might all be part of a broader practice of creating landscape monuments to preserve cultural memories. Modern digital analysis of the giant has revealed details that weren't visible to earlier researchers. High-resolution mapping has shown that the figure's proportions follow mathematical relationships that suggest sophisticated design principles. The placement of anatomical features and the positioning of the club all conform to geometric patterns that indicate careful planning rather than crude folk art. The question of what the Cerne Abbas giant actually represents remains hotly debated among archaeologists and historians. Is it a Roman-era Hercules, a medieval fertility symbol, a prehistoric commemorative monument, or could it preserve memories of an actual giant individual who lived in the area and whose story became legendary over time? Recent comparative studies have examined similar hill figures and giant monuments from around the world, revealing that the creation of large-scale human figures in the landscape is a practice found across many cultures and time periods. The Nazca lines of Peru, the Atacama giant of Chile, and various European hill figures all suggest that humans have a long tradition of creating monumental representations of important individuals or deities. The scientific study of the giant continues to yield new insights as technology advances. Ground-penetrating radar, magnetometry, and other archaeological techniques continue to reveal hidden features and provide clues about the monument's construction and history. Future research may finally solve the mystery of when and why this remarkable figure was created. What we can say with certainty is that the Cerne Abbas giant represents one of the most enduring mysteries in British archaeology. Whether it commemorates an actual giant, represents a mythological figure, or serves some other purpose entirely, it stands as evidence that our ancestors felt compelled to create permanent monuments to beings of extraordinary size and power. The giant's survival through centuries of social change, religious upheaval, and modernization suggests that it holds meaning that transcends any single interpretation. Each generation has found reasons to preserve and maintain this ancient figure, ensuring that its mystery continues to challenge and intrigue us today. As we conclude our investigation of giant mysteries, the Cerne Abbas giant serves as a fitting final piece of evidence. Unlike the fragmentary bones and contested artifacts we've examined elsewhere, the giant stands in plain sight, undeniably real, yet thoroughly mysterious. It reminds us that our ancestors' world included beings and beliefs that we may never fully understand, but that continue to leave their mark on our landscape and our imagination. As our journey across continents and through time comes to an end, we find ourselves confronting a puzzle that spans the entire history of human civilization. From the red-haired giants sealed in Nevada caves to the massive hill figure carved into English chalk downs, we've encountered evidence that challenges our understanding of both human history and the natural world our ancestors inhabited. The discoveries we've explored aren't isolated anomalies that can be easily dismissed. They form a pattern that spans cultures, continents, and millennia. In Nevada, the Paiute preserved stories of cannibalistic giants that seem to match physical evidence found in Lovelock Cave. In Bulgaria, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a warrior whose exceptional height and exotic burial goods suggest he belonged to a population unlike typical ancient Europeans. Mexico gave us Tepexpan Man, a hunter whose size and genetic characteristics hint at human diversity that conventional theories haven't fully explained. China revealed the Jinniushan Woman, an early human whose massive stature and advanced features pushed the boundaries of what we thought possible 300,000 years ago. England provided Gristhorpe Man, a Bronze Age individual whose foreign burial customs and exceptional height suggest that giants weren't just figures of legend, but real people who commanded respect and resources in the ancient world. But our investigation revealed that human giants weren't the only outsized beings that once walked the earth. The giant ground sloths of Texas, the mammoths of Austrian wine cellars, all demonstrate that our planet once supported creatures that would seem mythical if we didn't have their fossilized remains as proof. These discoveries force us to confront the possibility that our ancestors lived in a world where encountering genuine giants wasn't extraordinary, but simply part of the reality they navigated every day. The pattern that emerges from our investigation suggests that the boundary between myth and history may not be as clear as we typically assume. The consistent appearance of giant legends across cultures that had no contact with each other might not represent shared psychological archetypes or religious symbolism. Instead, these stories might preserve actual memories of encounters with beings who were genuinely different from ordinary humans. Yet questions remain. If giants once existed, where did they come from? Were they simply humans who had access to better nutrition and favorable genetics? Or did they represent something more mysterious? Perhaps survivors from lost civilizations or isolated populations that had developed along different evolutionary paths. The disappearance of these giants also raises puzzling questions. Many of the discoveries we've examined date to periods of dramatic environmental change: the end of the Ice Age, the extinction of megafauna, the rise of agricultural societies. Did changing conditions eliminate the ecological niches that had supported unusually large humans? Or did advancing human technologies make raw physical size less important for survival? The evidence we've examined suggests that the world of giants wasn't limited to human beings. The massive creatures that once dominated landscapes across the globe created environments where large humans might have been not just possible, but necessary for survival. When you're facing down a mammoth or hunting giant ground sloths, being tall and strong isn't just an advantage, it might be the difference between life and death. But the disappearance of these giant animals coincides closely with the apparent disappearance of giant humans, suggesting that their fates might have been linked. As the megafauna died out and environments changed, the selective pressures that had favored large body size might have disappeared as well, leading to the more uniform human populations we see in later periods. The archaeological evidence we've examined is fragmentary and often controversial, but it consistently points toward a past that was more diverse and extraordinary than conventional histories suggest. The giants we've encountered weren't supernatural beings or mythological creatures. They were flesh and blood individuals who lived, died, and left traces of their existence for us to discover thousands of years later. What makes their stories particularly compelling is how they connect to the living traditions of indigenous peoples around the world. The Paiute stories of the Sakar, the Native American legends of red-haired cannibals, the Pacific Islander tales of turtle dragons. These aren't just quaint folklore, but potentially accurate historical accounts passed down through generations of oral tradition. The mystery of the giants ultimately forces us to question our assumptions about human history and the reliability of conventional archaeological narratives. How much of our past have we lost to time, deliberate suppression, or simple neglect? What other discoveries might be waiting in unexplored caves, forgotten museum collections, or sites that haven't been properly investigated? The giants we've encountered today represent more than just unusually tall individuals from the distant past. They embody the possibility that human history is far stranger, more diverse, and more fascinating than we typically imagine. They remind us that our ancestors lived in a world where the impossible was commonplace and where beings of extraordinary size and power shared the landscape with ordinary humans. Whether these giants were evolutionary anomalies, survivors from lost civilizations, or something else entirely, their existence challenges us to approach human history with greater humility and openness. The evidence suggests that our ancestors' world included elements that we may never fully understand, but that continue to leave traces for those willing to look beyond conventional explanations. The mystery of the giants remains unsolved, but our investigation has revealed that the evidence for their existence is far more compelling than most people realize. From the carefully documented remains in European burial mounds to the massive creatures that once shared our world, the pieces of the puzzle are scattered across the globe, waiting for researchers brave enough to put them together. What do you think? Have we uncovered evidence that giants once walked the earth alongside our ancestors? Or are we seeing patterns where none exist, connecting unrelated discoveries into a narrative that appeals to our sense of wonder but lacks scientific foundation? The debate continues in laboratories and universities around the world as new analytical techniques reveal details about these discoveries that weren't accessible to earlier generations of researchers. Ancient DNA analysis, isotope studies, and advanced dating methods are providing unprecedented insights into the lives and origins of these mysterious individuals. But the ultimate answers may come not from advanced technology, but from a willingness to question our assumptions about what human history includes and excludes. The giants we've explored today challenge us to consider possibilities that conventional archaeology has been reluctant to embrace. If you found this investigation compelling, There are ways you can contribute to solving these mysteries. Support archaeological research, especially projects that examine controversial or neglected discoveries. Visit museums and ask about unusual specimens in their collections. Engage with indigenous communities whose oral traditions preserve knowledge that academic archaeology has overlooked. Most importantly, maintain your sense of wonder about the past. Human history is far stranger and more fascinating than any textbook suggests, and the evidence for giants represents just one example of the extraordinary secrets that may still be waiting to be uncovered. The giants may be gone, but their legacy lives on in the questions they raise about human origins, capabilities, and diversity. By continuing to investigate these mysteries with open minds and rigorous methods, we honor both the memory of these extraordinary beings and the possibility that our understanding of human history is far from complete. Thank you for joining this journey into one of archaeology's greatest mysteries. The search for answers continues, and every new discovery brings us closer to understanding the true scope of human history and the giants who once shared our world. Mound looked unremarkable from the outside, just another of the thousands of such mounds that dot the Bulgarian landscape, remnants of Thracian civilization that flourished in this region over 2 millennia ago.